Before the evolution of computer imaging and compositing, a more typical effects film might feature miniatures, animation, matte paintings, and blue screen shots joined together on an optical printer, resulting in a negative which could be generations removed from the original, with a considerable degradation of image quality. Brazil was less typical, in that its effects work was primarily done in camera, performed complete on stage with no additional optical work needed. This allowed for the effect shots negative to go straight into the film's final negative. For Brazil, Terry Gilliam called upon two special effects veterans with whom he had worked before. Richard Conway, who had worked on the Monty Python TV series and helped build the creature in Jabberwocky and supervised miniatures for The Meaning of Life, and George Gibbs, whose pre-Brazil credits included Superman, The Meaning of Life, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, for which he won an Academy Award. Terry Gilliam had initially planned for the flying sequences to be done with Jonathan Pryce in costume against a blue screen. Because of the complexity of the flying sequences and the difficulty Pryce faced wearing the harness and rigging, the filmmakers relied more and more upon a model, which ultimately performed most of the aerial shots. According to Julian Doyle, who photographed many of the effects sequences, there are only about 2 blue screen shots with Pryce in the whole film. The model of Sam was 8 inches long and its limbs were made of lead, jointed so as to flex and bounce realistically. Using control wires and radio controls, a tiny motor inside the model generated movements of the wings. The flying figure was shot in front of a vast painted sky backdrop with artificial clouds and blazing arc lights. Julian Doyle.
And that was the trick with a lot of the flying shots, was always to have the lights pointing straight into the lens. At the beginning of the track, when this little dummy flies by, I want the light pointing, an arc lamp, to point straight down the lens here. And then at the end of the track, as we track round and follow this thing, which shot across the studio so quickly, it was unbelievable, you know, trying to keep it in frame. I mean, and then at the other end of the track would be the light pointing down the lens again. So that would hide a lot of the wires, because the dummy obviously was running on wires.
Camera speeds varied from 72 frames per second to 96 and even 120. That's 5 times normal speed. When the footage was slowed down to proper 24 frames per second projection, the model would appear to have more mass and would seem to respond to gravity in a normal way. Hundreds of takes of the flying model were filmed, with those revealing wires scrapped. From the remainder, Gilliam and Doyle edited together these dream sequences, which had a buoyancy and grace that would have been nearly impossible to duplicate with full-size actors with matted-in backgrounds. The monoliths were pieces of timber about 8 feet long and 18 inches thick. For their skin, a mold was created for the small-scale brickwork, with the pattern repeated over the entire monolith in plaster. Dozens of takes were done for the monoliths rising up from the landscape, using various camera speeds and lenses in order to achieve a proper sense of mass for the falling of dirt and debris. To shoot additional takes, of course, meant redressing the 40 by 70 foot long miniature landscape set through which the monoliths were raised, which would take 2 to 3 hours. One dream deleted from the final film that at least made it to the shooting stage was the eyeball sequence, in which hundreds of eyeballs make up a vast landscape. Effects supervisor Richard Conway called it a quite grotesque problem. The eyeballs, about 900 were made in all, were standard-issue billiard balls, with holes drilled to accommodate the mounts and gears required to move them. The irises were reduced photographs of eyes glued onto the balls. Conway set up a cam system underneath the tabletop so that each eyeball on the outside of the set would have a more oblique angle than the ones at the center. As Sam would fly over the landscape, the eyes would all move, but each with a slightly different axis, each focused on the tiny figure above. The camera was only about 10 inches from the eyeballs in front, using an extremely wide angle. The depth of field of the shot was from about 6 inches to infinity. The police pursuit of Jill's truck over highways and through crowded city streets was shot almost entirely with miniatures. One reason was that the pedestrian walkways at Marne-le-Vallée, where location footage was shot, could not accommodate the full-size vehicles. The miniature trucks and vans were placed on a tabletop and were pulled by cables from underneath. A miniature set of Marne-la-Vallée was constructed as a backdrop, complete with transport cages in the background. Barely visible in the background are the 2.5-inch running people, inserted to make the setting appear less static. But miniature photography was not limited to models. During Sam's duel with the towering samurai warrior, a boy stand-in was used in long shots, dressed in a scaled-down costume, in order to heighten the sense of perspective between the two combatants. He was also used in the Brick Kurtzman sequence to similar effect. Special effects supervisor George Gibbs.
This boy was very good because although he was only a boy, he had manly movements. He could move around just like a man. He wasn't like a boy, sort of gawky. With the close-up stuff to make the giant look good, we always kept the camera very low down on the floor.
George Gibbs created the startling effects of flames erupting from the wounded samurai using highly flammable chemicals, including ether and strontium, which were released from pressurized containers lit by hidden gas pilots located within the costume. Winston Dennis, who appeared in Time Bandits and Munchausen, was the unfortunate soul inside this flaming outfit, but he was safely protected by the same kind of fire-retardant suit that race car drivers wear. Inspired by a hideous mask that Gilliam had once received from his mother, the Forces of Darkness, or FODs, were a combined headache for both costume designer James Acheson and the effects department, which had to mass-produce the masks. The creature concept was of a demonic being that was both infant-like and decaying, signifying the beginning and ending of life. Worn by dancers, the costume's effect was a combination of puppetry and mime. In addition to showing the creatures in action, this clip from Peerless Optical illustrates a rare example of a Brazil match shot in which separate elements are optically combined to create a single image. James Acheson.
These creatures, I remember he did a little drawing for us, and we attempted to faithfully recreate this, and it never quite worked. The strange idea of a creature with a baby mask went through all sorts of tests and rehearsals, and it never was the convincing image that I hoped it would be. Terry had drawn something which was really very difficult to achieve. I remember he had a very firm idea of what that image was, and it was an image that we tried very hard to make work, and it never really did. And now, again, I take full responsibility for it, but I wish we could have gone on our tack and brought him in at a later date, which was usually the procedure.
The most gruesome effect in the film appears when Sam Lowry spills the contents of Mrs. Turaine's coffin. The woman who had undergone acid treatment from the notorious Dr. Chapman had been reduced to jelly and offal, which pour onto the floor. George Gibbs.
We made a live cast, and we made a mould, and then we made it with aspic, put lots of bits of plastic in and some entrails and things, and then we poured it in moulds and then just waited for it to cure. So it was a real difficult job.
The last miniature effect performed for the film was perhaps the most cathartic, the destruction of the Ministry of Information building. The explosion was created using naphthalene and was recorded at high speeds by several cameras, up to 360 frames per second, 15 times normal speed. The textures of Brazil's non-computerized special effects give the film an organic quality, a realism, that makes the film's flights of fantasy and its human drama all the more seductive and unforgettable.